All in all, this game is great, and easily one of the greatest entries of the franchise in my opinion. It gives us everything that made 2 great, like genuine character interactions, heartfelt moments, and general coolness.
In this retrospective, it's all wrong. The seriousness with which this game takes its subject matter really impressed me.
And maybe even a few defenses of moments where the fandom doesn't seem to think it does. Back in 2012, it was one of the most hated video games ever. What if I told you I like this game? Assassin's Creed 3 was developed by Ubisoft Montreal, directed by Alex Hutchinson, written by Corey May, and released in October 2012 on the Xbox 360, PS3, Wii U, and PC. This game has a really special place in my heart. Not only do I believe this game got a bad rap, but I unapologetically love it and had an unbridled good time playing it, both initially and while making this retrospective. Let me explain why. Firstly, it's important to note that every time a decent enough number of games have been created under the current mold, Assassin's Creed undergoes a massive design shift. This usually happens when the story jumps significantly forward or backward in time, and ushers in a new wave of game assets. That is to say, new environmental elements, effects, and general details associated with this new time period, updated graphics, and new mechanics, which are, of course, explained in-universe by Animus software update. AC3 marked the first of these revamps, and as such, it's kind of understandable why people were jarred. The AC3/4 era probably has some of my favorite gameplay in the series. While certainly less realistic, I think the parkour and combat are some of the smoothest feeling we've gotten, and all the animations have been revved up. Seriously, I can forgive the fact that the combat is probably over 80% cutscenes because they're so satisfying to watch. This game really nailed the setting and atmosphere of colonial America. From the thrilling historical battles, which are something special in their own right, all the way down to the details of the Boston and New York streets, you constantly feel ensconced in one of the most significant turning points in Western history. But let's get into the real meat of the game. The characters.
Listen, you toddy-headed twiddle-poop. There's a difference between a tribe and a confederation, and it's not my fault your skull's too thick to make sense of it. I'm so sick of these people. You know... Oh!
Who are you calling a twiddle-poop, you crump-bag scab? Hey now. This is between me and him.
Yeah, mind your business.
I was actually referring to Connor and Haytham.
Who should I say you are?
You don't? They'll know.
Who gave Haytham the right to be this good? Seriously, I've talked about previous installments adding depth to the ideological aspects of the Assassin-Templar conflict, but Haytham did put Templars on the map in terms of their potential for fleshed out and compelling characters.
The only difference, Connor, the only difference between myself and those you aid is that I do not feign affection.
We spend about the first quarter of the game playing as this guy, and he's charming, interesting, and every motivation of his feels sincere and sometimes even convincing. By the time he's revealed to be a Templar, he's already been established as a multifaceted person, which makes him an even better antagonist. They nailed every aspect of Haytham, and I think they knew that, considering they immediately tried to replicate his success with a Templar-led Assassin's Creed game. But, well, we'll get to that. Now let's talk about Connor. And I don't think the fandom's reaction to him was as much a reflection on his character as it was their inevitable response to any character given the impossible task of following up to Ezio. Ezio had become the face of the series and had been with us for 3 straight games, and the wound of losing that character was still fresh. I doubt any character could have satisfactorily succeeded him. Taking Connor's story without comparison to something else, I think it's a genuinely heartfelt one, and I'm not the only one it seems. Look at any Connor-related video on this platform, and the comments will be overflowing with defenses of the character. I found Connor to be pretty compelling, and at no point did I find him quote-unquote confusingly written. He's consistently bullheaded, but that is his character flaw.
And why should I give you any credit?
Then don't. But first, return the robe and the blade and the darts and all of the years of training and knowledge I have bestowed upon you.
His is a tragic story of an obstinately good man who continually learns over the course of failure after failure that mercy and fairness are almost never recognized or rewarded on their own merits in this world. He has to face the possibility that maybe Achilles and Haytham's skepticisms are warranted, but they're not the only option. And Connor's realization of that is the bittersweet victory of the game. The realization that the good path is the hardest path, but it's the one worth taking. And nowhere is this better represented than Connor's stupidly cut final speech. Connor's lesson is that there is inherent value not in being naive or cynical, but putting trust in good people and principles, even if you don't immediately see that trust pay off.
I may never succeed. The assassins may struggle another 1,000 years in vain, but we will not stop.
Oh yeah, and this game's score is freaking awesome. The first word that comes to mind is heroic, then intense, then hype. All in all, I think this game is underrated. But you know what's not underrated? Listen, there are a lot of these games, so I have to do a lot of segues here, and they're not all going to be gold. Let's just move on to the next game. Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag was developed by Ubisoft Montreal, directed by John Goudon, written by Darby McDevitt, and released in October 2013 on the Xbox 360, PS3, Wii U, PS4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, and PC. Jeez. AC4, also known as Assassins of the Caribbean, the living embodiment of fun, and my intro to the franchise. A game of pirates, sailing, glory, and gold. We start off with a bang, showcasing improved naval combat and cut to a simple backstory that makes us feel for Edward immediately, which in no small part is thanks to Ryan's performance, which deserves its own shout out. This dude's acting reeks of sincerity and charisma. And no matter how terrible he is at the beginning, he still somehow gets you rooting for Edward, and his pirate jargon is so endearing.
Lay aboard, lads! The man speaks true, you lot weigh anchor. As for the rest, half on the foremast and half at the main. Let's outrun this hurricane!
Part of how this game manages to thrust you right into the excitement is fantastic. Adrenaline-raising, tide-rising, swashbuckling, scurvy-inducing, I don't know. The music from Brian Tyler. Can we just admire how great this man is at creating catchy soundtracks? He did Black Flag, Iron Man 3, Age of Ultron, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3? Like, how? Every time I hear this theme, I just want to leap out of my window and take command of my pirate ship. There's no feeling quite like captaining your own ship. Sure, traveling from one end of the ocean to the other can seem intimidating at first, but once you start sailing, you'd have to try really hard to get bored. I will never get tired of storming random ships in the sea, boarding their cruiser, taking all of their supplies, and stealing all of their men before sending their ship to the bottom of the sea. Even when you're not in combat, the gorgeous view from your ship and travel speed is just, from the immersive water physics to the jaw-dropping skyline, it's all just breathtaking.
You're breathtaking!
I will also embarrassingly admit that I've memorized every single pirate shanty. I've literally spent so much time at sea, it's probably single-handedly the reason why I have over 200 hours into this game. The environments are gorgeous! Just, look at it! The luscious greenery, the white sand, the humble towns of the Caribbean islands, the blue-ass water. As far as size goes, the map is the largest we've ever seen. The Caribbean map of AC4 is approximately 90.2 square freaking miles. For those of you who are bad at math, that's insane. Granted, most of the map is water, but even still, this is amazing for a game released in 2013. The only AC game that has topped this map size is Odyssey, which has a map size of 90.7 square miles. However, I do feel like Black Flag definitely did it better, but more on that later. The parkour is a streamlined version of 3's already solid but buggy system. The climbing speed is more realistic and the camera movement is less awkward. This game really is just a polished AC3, which is to say good. My only real problem with the gameplay is the occasional glitch with the sound effects, where the sound effect may either cut off or simply stop playing during a combat interaction. At least, I thought it was a glitch for the longest time, but there are times where it feels like they just forgot to add sound effects.
God damn fucking knave, Vane!
Like, is it just me, or would this scene work a lot better with sound effects?
God damn fucking knave, Vane!
That's better. Otherwise, I love little details they've added to the gameplay from AC3. For example, the little extra camera shakiness when Edward runs feels and plays a lot better than AC3's running animation, where there's virtually no shakiness and feels staler. But it isn't just the gameplay. Edward's arc is incredibly compelling. At the very beginning, his objective is clear. He left his wife in England to go pursue the life of a rich pirate in the Caribbean, where golden glory awaited him. He cared little about those he hurt and those he was forced to kill on this path.
What have you done since Nassau fell, huh? Nothing but murder and mayhem.
You threw in with the very kind we once hated!
But if you continue on your present course, you'll find you're the only one walking it. With the gallows at its end.
Say what you will about Black Flag feeling too much like a pirate game, but no other arc feels more perfect for an assassin than a character who started off as a selfish anti-hero to redeeming himself by becoming a master assassin. Yes, he's a pirate who committed countless sins, but towards the last quarter of the game, the assassin chose to right his wrongs and to stop the Templar plot.
Edward. Everyone's gone, aren't they? Mary, Rackham, Touch, all the rest. I miss them so, rough as they were. Do you feel that too? All empty inside?
I do. Devil curse me.
This may be quite the hot take, but to me, Edward is a more compelling character than Ezio. Sure, nothing can beat 3 games worth of beautiful character development, but the thing is, even from the beginning, Ezio always had the core traits of an assassin deep within him. He was born for the creed. Edward, on the other hand, didn't possess a single trait of an assassin, and had to learn his lesson of humility harder than any main character in the franchise. He has the most tragic story, and a very tragic ending. As hard as it may be to create a more beloved character like Ezio, Edward is my personal favorite assassin. The game reeks with charisma and adventure at every turn. The world is inviting, with endless islands to explore, with beautiful white sand and blue-ass water. With this being my first Assassin's Creed, I couldn't be more happy reliving the joys of what brought me into this franchise. Assassin's Creed Rogue was developed by Ubisoft Sofia, directed by Mikhail Lozanov, written by Richard Faris, and released in November 2014 on the PS3 and Xbox 360. So I'm not going to waste much time on this one because I think it's very bad, and this is coming from someone who's played the game through multiple times, somehow. I think I replayed it multiple times trying to understand it more to see if I simply missed something that would change the way I think about it, but the more I replay it, the more and more I dislike it. The game reuses literally every mechanic and asset from the previous 2 games to complete this one as a full-price standalone title, when in reality, it would have worked much better as a DLC. Sure, Brotherhood and Revelations gameplay also worked as an extension of AC2, but they still felt like improvements. Rogue's gameplay just feels like a worse version of AC4. Naval returns once more, but is far more boring and staler than the previous game's naval systems. The open world is not at all engaging, with the only thing to do outside of the main story is to collect the thousands of collectibles that litter the entire map. Seriously, who has time for all that? In the long run, it adds a few features here and there, but nothing significant enough to really redeem itself or innovate the series formula. The worst part about this game is the story and how poorly written it is. Not only is Shay not a very interesting character to me, but the game constantly contradicts previously established concepts and lore for the sake of making it seem like the assassins are the bad guys. It just doesn't work. The only good thing I can say about this game is the soundtrack, and the final scene of the game that is the stepping stone for the next game in the franchise. Assassin's Creed Unity was developed by Ubisoft Montreal, directed by Alexander Amancio, written by Travis Stout, and released in November 2014 on the Xbox One, PS4, and PC. When I first played this game, I thought it was a masterpiece. Now, I know that's a weird opening statement coming from this game, but when this game first came out, I was like 13. I didn't even know what a masterpiece was. That said, you should already have a rough idea of where this game stands in my heart. So let's start with the things I absolutely love about this game. On paper, this has the potential to be one of the greatest Assassin's Creed games ever made. Every single game mechanic has been improved to its utmost potential. For example, In the previous two games, while the combat animations were insanely fun to watch, they weren't skill-based mechanics. The combat had always been relatively easy and required little to no skill or tactic. Unity is the game that introduced the level-based combat mechanics to the franchise. As you progress through the story and venture into more dangerous enemy territory, it becomes imperative that you spend more time gathering money, whether that involves looking for locked chests, solving murder mysteries, or playing heist missions, so that you invest into higher level equipment that is based on your playstyle. Each weapon remains unique based on factors such as speed, damage, and parrying. Of course, with it being an Assassin's Creed game, you are still able to assassinate high-level enemies by sneaking up on them. While that may seem like the obvious approach if you're low level, that still requires careful planning and stealth tactics, which is a skill of its own. And if you feel at that, then well, essentially it becomes a huge gangbang. Nevertheless, enhancing the combat to make it more challenging while still keeping core Assassin's Creed mechanics like assassinations makes the game feel more Assassin's Creed than ever. I can't say the same about later games in the franchise. Origins and Odyssey. The parkour is the best it's ever been. Before Unity, the best parkour we had was arguably the Ezio games, which gave the players more creative control over how they're able to parkour. However, they really started to think outside of the box when it came time to revamping the system. Paris is the perfect dense city for free climbing and navigation. The developers really went out of their way to maintain historical accuracy to the level design, while still making it feel like an Assassin's Creed game. In fact, they did so well crafting buildings such as Notre Dame that when the fire of Notre Dame de Paris happened back in 2019, the architects and builders used hyper-realistic photos and videos of the cathedral to recreate the building, including the 3D mapping of the building used in this video game. Seriously, if there's an Oscar for level design, the level design artists deserve it. That's insane. Anyways, I was talking about the parkour. Unity's parkour is absolute peak Assassin's Creed parkour. As much as I love the occasional challenge of climbing up certain structures back in AC2, it became a bit repetitive after a while. Even freerunning just felt slow at times. The parkour is now much smoother in the sense that it's easier to climb buildings, escape deadly situations, and really feel like an assassin. And I just want to give a big old smooch to the guy who came up with the idea of implementing the parkour down feature. Every time I use it, I'm blown away by not only how well it works, but how efficient it is. My only complaint is that my assassin still feels ridiculously uncoordinated. Oh my god, just get, oh my, come on! Before I get into the story itself, I just want to talk about how the campaign itself plays better than previous entries. AC games, especially 3 and 4, are well known for their repetitive nature of, tell this guy, assassinate that guy, now tell this guy in your ship, and now, guess what? Tell this guy again.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
The missions are now so much better designed that it doesn't feel like you're doing the same thing over and over and over again for 20 plus hours. At the end of most sequences, you are given missions to assassinate Templars, and you can do that based on how creative you want to be. This is where the game really makes you feel like being an assassin.
And if all other plans fail, why not sacrifice yourself for the cause, your life for his? Before Altair, that was the Levantine approach.
You mean a dagger in broad daylight as I'm cut down where I stand?
Sends a powerful message.
I'll do it my way.
Whatever you think best, assassin.
Not the kind of person who's a fan of stealth? You don't gotta waste any time. Run right up to your target and stab the crap out of him. Prefer a stealthy approach? Find an infiltration opportunity and assassinate your target. Prefer a creative approach? There's always an opportunity around to find a creative approach to eliminate your target. One of my favorites is a mission where you can poison your target and deliver the final blow before they pass out. Prefer to send a message and strike down your target in public view? Do it. And you can finally crouch! Someone tell me why it wasn't until the 7th game in a stealth action franchise when Ubisoft realized we should be able to crouch.
But dude, you could crouch in earlier games, remember?
This doesn't count. You can't even move! Speaking of being an assassin, the protagonist, albeit being a little too formulaic for most, I find to be really compelling. At least at first. Right away, you get Ezio vibes from Arno. He's brash, reckless, and a charismatic kid who does nothing but get himself into trouble.
Well, in a just world, Victor, I would agree with you, but this is not a just world. This is France.
He witnesses the murder of his adoptive father, Francisco de Lesser, and he's immediately framed for it. What mattered to him was finding the men responsible for putting him in jail and destroying his relationship with Elise. Couple that with the fact that his biological father was an assassin, this led directly to him finding the Brotherhood of Paris. After that, the game kind of loses you. Instead of focusing on, being an assassin, The game sort of sidelines the assassin story and focuses on the romance story. The romance story is decent, but it would have worked a lot better if it were more of a subplot. At one point in the game, Arno is literally cast out from the Brotherhood, but the game treats that as almost irrelevant, because in the very next game he dons the costume again. Eventually he rejoins the Order, but apparently that wasn't important because it wasn't even in the game, because Arno thinking deeply about Elise was more important than that. I don't think that Arno's character is necessarily bad. He does have a level of depth to him if you look closely, but the game's writing doesn't do him any justice. On that note, I'd love to bring attention to one more thing. I absolutely adore the co-op feature. Multiplayer has been a thing in previous Assassin's Creed titles, but never to the extent where you could do missions together, or if you roam in the city. I've always imagined racing through rooftops, scaling large buildings, and doing leaps of faith while a buddy does the same right next to me. And now I can.
Now the next person dies if you don't hand over the Krispy Kreme.
Overall, I would describe Unity as a flawed masterpiece. I firmly believe that, from a gameplay perspective, Unity is the perfect Assassin's Creed game. If only the developers had been given more time to work on this game, rather than rushing the release, I believe that it would have been the perfect Assassin's Creed. While AC2 may have been the heart of the franchise, on paper, Unity is what every Assassin's Creed title should strive to be.
All that we do, all that we are, begins and ends with ourselves.
Assassin's Creed Syndicate was developed by Ubisoft Quebec, directed by Marc-Alexis Cote, written by Corey May, and released in October 2015 on the PS4, Xbox One, and PC. Syndicate is the first Assassin's Creed game in the franchise that I have mixed feelings on. I don't hate it or love it, it's always just kind of been that awkward middle child. Unlike Unity, the marketing never piqued my interest. My first impressions of the game was that it was essentially just Unity but with two playable characters, and the rope launcher, and drivable vehicles, and trains, and street brawls, and okay, this game is kind of cool. Right from the opening of the game, I immediately loved the Fry twins. The dynamic between the two of them immediately made me smile and realize that this is going to be one fun ride of a game. I would go as far as to say that their dynamic is what carried the game and made it as fun as it was. Unlike the previous few assassins, we don't know their full backstories, only that their father was an assassin. One of the things that made their dynamic work so well is that both Jacob and Evie are absolutely dedicated to the Assassin Order, but both have different objectives that they think will benefit the Creed.
Perhaps you should trust my judgment.
I've been killing Starrick's henchmen. What have you been doing? Let's ask Henry, shall we?
I have been repairing your mistakes. Too much haste is too little speed.
Don't you quote father at me.
That's Plato. And I am sorry this doesn't involve anything you can destroy. Father was right, he never approved of your methods.
Father is dead!
Enough!
Jacob, the slightly more reckless twin, wants to start a gang in London called the Rooks in order to stand up to the Templar gang leaders. Evie, on the other hand, wants to find the piece of Eden and prevent it from falling into Templar hands. Both end objectives are to put an end to Crawford Starrick, the notorious Templar leader. And this guy, he's pretty...
I told you not to disturb me!
badass? Well, at least on paper. Starrick comes off as unironically cheesy as he spends the majority of the game monologuing about tea and twirling his evil mustache. The plot leading to the confrontation can be entertaining,
Hey, yo, what the
but ultimately it never has any real stakes. Nevertheless, it's still all the more satisfying to stab the crap out of the bastard at the end of the game. Can I also talk about how much I love the soundtrack? Well, okay, to be fair, every soundtrack of this franchise is amazing. I say that as a guy who literally went to the Dolby Theater in LA to watch a live symphony of Assassin's Creed soundtracks with a lot of cinema.
Here's a giant Phantom Menace hit.
But Syndicate's is different. Its basic instruments somehow evoke such strong emotions. Haunting, dark, and just overall beautiful. It's not as epic as, say, AC3's main theme, but it doesn't need to be epic, just nostalgic and memorable. Syndicate's combat is the most different from any AC title we've ever had before. Can we just talk about how brutal the combat is though? I love how insane it is. The combat is faster than ever. In Syndicate, you can now beat down enemies at a much faster rate, resulting in this brawl/beatdown combat mechanic. And to top it all off, you can chain your finishers from 2 to 5 people at once, and I never get tired of watching them. As far as I know, I don't think I've ever seen the same finisher animation more than once or twice. Like Unity, the combat remains skill-based, so don't get your hopes up for taking on hordes of enemies with your
Fist. Oh, sounds like your last Saturday night.
Actually, no, you can do that with brass knuckles. One of the most controversial features in this game is the introduction of the rope launcher. While I do think it does take away from the parkour aspects, I'm still glad it was introduced. Without the rope launcher, navigating the world would be a lot tougher. This is due to the historical setting. Each Assassin's Creed game's world design is entirely dependent on the historical setting. While it may have worked beautifully for games like AC Unity and the Ezio games, other games like Origins are set during time periods with a far more open space with only few designated cities. London is a city where buildings are huge and spaced far apart. The rope launcher works far more efficiently in this setting, as it allows you to traverse the environment quicker. I also feel like it doesn't take away from the concept of being an assassin either. Throwing a smoke bomb on the ground and taking off with the rope launcher really makes you feel like a stealthy ninja. Syndicate also has some really great side content as well. Most notably, there's a mission where you play as Jacob's granddaughter during World War I. Not only is the side story insanely cool, but this is the closest the franchise has ever gotten us to the present day. And finally, the lore. While not as lore heavy as a game like Revelations, I learned a lot about the previous Assassins. In particular, my boy,
Edward Kenway!
Syndicate is the last game in the franchise that connects the previous Assassins. After the events of Black Flag, Edward returned back to London to settle old scores and bought a house in London. The Assassins controlled London up until Edward was murdered. Ever since then, London was controlled by the Templars. There's a mission in the game where Evie and Henry infiltrates the now Templar-controlled mansion and locates Edward's hidden room, which can now only be opened by playing
subtle, is it?
In a sense, this game works as a continuation of Edward's story, picking up where Edward failed. I really do have a deep appreciation for this game. Is it the greatest game ever made? No. Is it the greatest Assassin's Creed of all time? No. Is it the worst Assassin's Creed? Definitely not. But as your typical, diehard, toxic Assassin's Creed fanboy, I'd have to say, it's a must-play to those who loved previous entries and want to see more from the franchise.
Sleep? I never sleep. I just wait in the shadows. I say we drench the gods with their blood for Sparta!
Glory! Power! What more do you need?